Hey, Chicagoland investors, have you heard of the Fair Housing Ordinance? If not, you better stick around and watch this. If you have, maybe this will be a good refresher. I'm 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝘁, founder, partner, GC Realty Development, Chicago Property Management Company, here managing about 1,500 doors. Also co-host of Chicago's #1 real estate investing podcast, Straight Up Chicago Investor. You gotta check that out. We drop new episodes every single week. You can find the videos on YouTube, or you can watch the videos on our website at straightupchicagoinvestor.com. But what we want to talk to you about today is the Fair Housing Ordinance. Now, the Fair Housing Ordinance is a Chicago law that came out in 2020. And what it did was change the timeframes for the notice you have to give tenants for either not renewing them or increasing the rent. And let me kind of break it down for you. So if you have a tenant that has been in your unit for less than 6 months, maybe you just let them move in on a month to month, you have to give them 30 days notice if they've been there less than 6 months to either increase their rent or not renew their lease. That is pretty simple. That's normal, or it feels normal. But not many people have tenants that have. You're not usually negotiating those things less than 6 months, so it really feels irrelevant to me. Now, what if you have a tenant that's been in there a year, or so anytime over 6 months, so 6 months and 1 day up to 36 months, you have to give 60-day notice. And if you have a tenant that's been there for more than 3 years, and it could just be 3 years and a day, they're very exact about this, you have to give 120-day notice in order to tell them you're going to either A, raise their rent, or B, you're not going to renew the lease. And the penalties are pretty harsh. So if you give notice, maybe you're supposed to give, your tenant's been there 5 years, supposed to give 120-day notice, and you only give 90-day notice, you are then required to give them an additional 120 days. Now, so maybe on 90 days you said, I want you out at the end of your lease. They now have the right to stick in your unit for another 120 days. Or same thing if it's a tenant that's been there less than 3 years. If you gave them 45-day notice and you're supposed to give them 60-day notice, they now have from the end of their lease an additional 60 days. So one other thing about this ordinance that's a lot of people, I see a lot of people screw up is the notice date then rounds to the end of that month of the 90 days. And let me say that let me give an example. So if you have a tenant that's, their lease ends on March 31st, and it's a 60-day notice you have to give them. So 60 days would be 2 months basically, so call it February 1st, or even a couple days before that. But if you give them notice, say on February 3rd, you then have to give them all the way notice. The full 60 days would then be, call it April 2nd, 3rd. You now have to give them to the end of April. And maybe that's a bad example because February has screwed up days. So if you have a tenant that's moving out October 31st and you give them notice September 3rd, you now have to give them all the way to the end of November, because the 60 days would technically fall November 2nd or 3rd. They now have to the end of that next month. So you have to November. So technically, you're giving them 58-day notice, but they're ultimately getting just under, they're getting 88-day notice because you missed that deadline. So make sure if you're trying to time it out, allow some room for error, or maybe they didn't get the notice, or they didn't accept the notice, or maybe you had it delivered with a process server, but it took a couple extra days. So what you want to do is make sure for your 60-day notices, you're maybe giving 70 or 75-day notice. For 120-day notice, maybe you want to make sure you give 140-day notice. So, and this goes true with the rent increases. So I told you before, if you miss those notices or you don't give them the right notice, they get to extend out based on the period of time they've been there without having to move out. And same with rent increases. So if you only give 60-day notice and you're supposed to give 120-day notice, when their lease ends and you're planning on getting the extra $100, you now have to give them 120 more days at that same rate before you could actually increase the rent. But don't get me wrong, you still have to give them the proper notice. It's not, I screwed up on the notice, now I get 100 days. You actually literally have to give them the notice again. So something important. Another thing that came out of the 2020 Fair Housing Ordinance is, and this has nothing to do with notices or dates or raising rents, but if you have a tenant that maybe you put is having collection issues, you try working out with them, you file for eviction, you put them in court, they have the right to one time to cure that rent amount without any penalty. So tenant could owe you $3,000 or $10,000, $7,000. You put them in court, you think, screw it, I'm going to get rid of this person. Maybe they've been a pain in the butt too, and they're not paying. I've tried being flexible, but it's not working out, so I'm going to evict them. Tenant can show up at court with that full amount that they owe you, and you have to accept the money one time. There's been many times in the past where we might have had a tenant that's like, you know what, it's not worth it. I want that tenant out. You know, we're not going to even honor collecting that money. But under the Fair Housing Act as 2020, if that same tenant comes in and they've never used this one-time right to cure, I have to accept whatever they owe in full. And I can't even charge them attorney fees. That's the other kicker. So you might have $900 or $1,000 into this for filing and appearance fees for your attorney, and you still have to collect the rent and you can't charge them back. Now, next time it happens again, you could put them into eviction again, and ultimately they don't have that one time option unless you negotiate some with them and you want to. So super tricky here. These laws we talked about today are specific to Chicago in Cook County, which falls under the RTLO, the Residential Tenant Landlord Ordinance, which was new in 2021, has similar notices, not as extreme, but it's just 60 days notice you have to give to the tenants. Now, if you're anywhere in the rest of Kane County, DuPage, anywhere in the rest of Illinois, rural Illinois, you're not having to give, you know, it's your standard 30-day notice if someone's at a month and so forth. So you don't have these laws, you don't have these penalties if you don't follow. So it's almost a wild, wild west once it gets outside of Cook County. So important to make sure you're given the right dates here. If you have, these laws are always changing, so I try to inform you guys, Chicago investors, between videos like this and the podcast strip, Chicago Investor, just trying to keep you guys in the know. If you guys don't want to do this stuff, if you don't want to have to worry about changing laws and make sure you give notice at the right time, you can hire a company like ours. We'll help you with the property management. And I really, people hire us for two reasons. One, buy back their time. Your time is probably far more valuable than the $150 you might pay me, roughly. I'm just throwing it out there, that you might pay us in management fees. And we're going to lower your risk. So everything we're talking about today is risk. You mess up on any of these things, it's risk. You end up in court, that's risk. And that ultimately takes more time, right? So you actually solve two things. So any way we can help you with that, always happy to help. If you have just random questions you want to bounce off me on your situation, I'm always willing to help. And we will see you soon.